Before I say anything about today's program, I just want to let you know that, of course, we have a program next month, and I think it's a very interesting program as well. We're talking about something that's international today, and next month's is also international. We have Thomas Colombat going to be speaking with us. He's a visiting professor of Quebec Studies at Western Washington University. He's going to talk to us about globalization and labor throughout North America, so Quebec, the rest of Canada, US, Mexico. I saw him speak twice in the last month, and he has some very, very interesting PowerPoint kinds of slides, and we'll give some of those as handouts as well. So that's for next month. Today we are looking at the big picture. We're talking about the Salish Sea, and we have with us Bert Weber, who is the person who was instrumental in helping that name become a reality. But the topic is Salish Sea. Where is it? What is it? Why is it important? And what's ahead? We're needing to get up and look up. We're not looking at a stream, a creek, the Nooksack River. We're looking at the whole Salish Sea and the impacts, the management. So if you take a balloon and you go up 10,000, 20,000 feet, you see, wow, this is all connected. And that's what we're talking about today, the connectivity and how we manage this wonderful but imperiled to some extent resource that we have. So Bert Weber, Professor Emeritus of Environmental Science, Huxley College, will be introducing the speakers in more detail. Joe Gatos is Executive Director of CDOC Society here, and then we're very fortunate to have, representing the Lummi Nation, we have, Randy Kinley, who's Natural Resources Department from Lummi, and then Troy Olson, also from Lummi, is going to be with us today. And so we'll have our panel presentation, then we'll have room for questions after that. So, Bert?
Thanks, Don. Before I start, I would like to appreciate and thanks the steering committee that you have, or whatever you call them, the program committee, those people who put together these programs, particularly Chuck Foster, who I've been working with closely over the last couple of months. I have a high regard for the quality and details that he puts into these, and my appreciation to him for sure to start with. Okay, I'm the timekeeper now, and I have had it explained to me that we are out of here at 1:30. So we acknowledge that. We have way too much to talk about in that time, but we'll see if we can get something that is coherent. So that song you heard, as some of you heard, because the chatter didn't start. It was an experiment to see whether the conversation level would increase as the sound level increased. It did. My hope was, everybody will quiet down and listen to the words. Holly Arnson is a Victoria songwriter and artist, and I heard this song. There's a story here. I heard this song in 2002. I was out with a group of people. We were doing a field trip, and this one person, who's a Bellingham person, actually, Glenn Alexander, pulled out his guitar and played this song. And I was moved, because I'd almost given up on the whole idea of the Salish Sea. I thought about it back in 1990, and there was a little bit of interest at that time. Interest, actually, that started here in Bellingham. For those of you that remember Leo Mullen, who used to work for the Bellingham Herald, he was instrumental. Because at that time, the state was on their relentless push to increase further north the name Puget Sound. And all of you have a map in front of you now? Okay, let's figure out where Puget Sound is. Well, there's a name on there, so you can tell. But if you follow down, we purposely left all the names of the places that we're familiar with, but if you follow down into the bottom end of Puget Sound, you can see there's a place where Tacoma Narrows is. It's a place where the rest of South Sound connects back into with the main part of Puget Sound. That, according to Vancouver, who named all these things, is Puget Sound. That's what he gave Puget, nothing else, no more. Since that time, the people of the state of Washington have wanted to push the name Puget Sound further north and north and north. And in the late 70s and 80s, they were trying to brand this area around here as Northern Puget Sound. Didn't fly. That's when I thought, the science is there. We know there's this area of Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and Georgia Strait is tied together in a single science ecosystem. And so I thought, I'm a biologist. You find something that people don't recognize, you name it, because that's what we do. So I sent in a name to the Geographic Board of Names in Washington State. They sent it out for some circulation. Nobody liked the idea. No validity. The academics at Western didn't like the idea, said absolutely not. And so I just let it sit and gave up trying to fight what I saw was going to be a losing battle. But I had a few students who were out in the islands, and they, particularly the ones that were in San Juan Island, said, Salish, sea makes sense, and started to use the name. And so it had a little bit of life. And then the scientists who knew that there was an ecosystem got working on it. There's a wonderful book here, 1994, which is titled Review of the Marine Environment and Biota of Strait of Georgia, Puget Sound, and Juan de Fuca Strait. They saw the unity at that time, but didn't have a name for it. Weren't as recently as 1994, the name Salish Sea was not being widely used. Then Holly Arntzen came along in the early 2000s, did that song, which got a lot of people interested. The natural resource managers came across a name. They started to adopt it. And what started actually got me enthusiastic again was that there was a person in British Columbia who made the suggestion to the BC government that they rename the Strait of Georgia the Salish Sea. And there was quite a bit of heat about that. All the royalists, we call them in British Columbia, the royalists came out and said, we cannot do that to King George. So BC government backed down. But I said, this is crazy. It's no more right to call our area around here Puget Sound as it is called the Strait of Georgia, the Salish Sea. So I put in the application again. This time there was a totally different reception, and 3 years ago, I can't even remember when now, the name is formally adopted by all the governments. So we have, that's a little bit of the history of the name. There were some early people who contributed to that. I need to take a moment and recognize the person who first named their boat the Salish Sea. It's a very common name now. In fact, I picked up a yachting magazine, and there was this $1.5 million boat floating around Puget Sound that was named the Salish Sea. But the first boat was a 29-foot sailboat owned by Hal Thurston, who gets... So he gets the credit of being one of the very early advocates. Where the boat went, I don't know, but the name still persists. Okay, so where is the Salish Sea? You've got the map there. I was really clever when I named it. I didn't try to put any boundaries on it. I just said Puget Sound, Strait of Juan de Fuca, Georgia Strait. Wherever they are, that's what we have as the Salish Sea. To the south, it's easy, isn't it? Yep, Puget Sound is connected, so we know what that is. To the west, it gets a little more complicated. Where does the Strait of Juan de Fuca end? Somewhere out there in the ocean. Depends on the winds. You get a big winter storm, oceanic water will come in as far as at Port Angeles, a line between Port Angeles and Victoria. In the summertime, it pushes out. But we don't know there. At the northern end of the Strait of Georgia, it's a little uncertain too. Where does the Strait of Georgia end? You'll notice that within the boundaries of your map here, the northernmost fjord, which is called Butte Inlet, is included in the Salish Sea. If you go ask the BC government, though, they exclude it. Something about power potential in the Butte Inlet that the BC government did not want to fiddle with. I don't know that whole story. But anyway, the boundaries are not totally clear. But wherever those three bodies of water land, we have the Salish Sea. You'll also notice on this map as well that there's a line that follows the Cascade Coast Mountain peaks, including that gives us the watershed of the Salish Sea, with one major exception. If you follow up the Fraser River, it doesn't show really clearly here, but it goes way into British Columbia and has a watershed up there which is more than equal to the watersheds of all the smaller rivers that go into the Salish Sea. But conceptually, resource managers like to think of the two of those things together. Okay, who uses it? You know, songwriters, authors, winemakers, real estate developers. There's a real estate development out by Birch Bay now that's called Salish Sea Heights. They changed the name when the name came along. Also, Washington State Ferry that's now called the Salish, the one that goes between Port Townsend and Whidbey Island. It's widespread. The name is being used, and it's a relief to me, I guess, that people are taking the name under their wings and using it more widely. So another question Hal asked me is, what's the relationship to the management of our natural resources in the Salish Sea? What is this presentation all about? Well, I hope you've sort of noticed that one of the major thrusts for the name comes from the natural resource managements, both in British Columbia and Washington, that are responsible for protecting and restoring the resources of the Salish Sea. And that's what our theme is today. We're going to start with Joe Gatos, who, I don't know, he's one of those people that have 2 PhDs. Now, you don't see them very often in life. And I slogged through one of them, and I can't imagine what it takes for a person to do yet another one. So it's a very, anybody else in the room here have 2 PhDs? Oh. Yeah. So we are in rarefied company today. As well, he is one of the most effective spokespersons for natural resource management in the Salish Sea. More than any other person has reached across the political boundary to try to look in a synthetic way at what our natural resource management issues are. He's going to talk first, and then we'll have a counterpoint that I'll wait for a minute or two to, or more than a minute or two. You get more than a minute or two. To our LUMI representatives, and I'll wait till then until I introduce them. So, Joe Gatos.
Okay, thanks, Bert. Don't clap. The problem with the PhD thing, I didn't learn enough on the first one. I guess if I'd have spent more time on the first one, I wouldn't have to do the second one. So I think it's an error on my part. Bert asked me to talk about the health of the Salish Sea, and I want to point out that the idea of health for ecosystems was first extended from medical health into ecosystems in the 1980s, when ecologists were trying to look for a term that they could use to talk about impaired ecosystems. I like it. Some scientists don't like it, but I feel like all of us personally have an internal understanding of what it feels like to be healthy and what it feels like to not be healthy. We've all been in that situation, and we can understand that with the ecosystem as well. The other thing that I think is nice is we all understand what vital signs are. We understand about things like heart rate or blood pressure or cholesterol level or body mass index. We can have those same sorts of vital signs on the ecosystem and learn what's going on with the ecosystem. So it's not perfect, but it does work. So let's talk about the health of the 17,000 square kilometer inland sea that Bert just introduced us to. I work for the CDOC Society, which is a nonprofit group that does funds and conducts science and gets science into policy. And shortly after the naming of the Salish Sea, we said, look, we need to kind of characterize what's there. And it's quite impressive. We found in a paper we just published, there are 172 different birds that use the ecosystem. And there are 37 different mammals that use the marine ecosystem. And we now have a scientist that's working on calculating the number of fish that use the ecosystem, and that's about 250 fish species, give or take a few, when he's finished with that project. We also have the claim to fame that we have a high percentage of our fishes are really old or long-lived fish. And we have things like yellow-eye rockfish that can live to be 118 years old. We have things like spiny dogfish that most of us think make good fish and chips that can live to be well over 100 years old. We're also the southernmost latitude in the entire world where we have all 5 species of Pacific salmon. But not just that here in the Salish Sea, we have all 5 species of salmon, but we also have 3 other salmonid species that use marine water and the fresh water. And those are sea-run cutthroat trout, we have bull trout, and then we have sea-run rainbow trout that are also called steelhead. So there's a lot of good things going on. Invertebrates, we haven't tallied the numbers, but the estimates are that probably have 3,000 different macroinvertebrates, just ones that you can see with the naked eye. And some of the cool things about the invertebrates is we have a lot of the world's largest octopus, a giant Pacific octopus that can be 150 pounds. It's not just the largest octopus, but it's actually the largest invertebrate in the world. We have the world's largest chitin. We have the world's largest barnacle. So we have a lot of claims to fame like that as well. I'll be selling barnacle t-shirts afterwards. We also are genetically distinct here with a lot of our animals. So even though we have rockfish that occur in the Salish Sea on the outer coast, the ones in the Salish Sea are genetically distinct. And that goes on for a number of different species that we have in the area. And then if we move away from the animals, we have one of the most productive low to mid-level temperate forests in the entire world. And some people say, well, is that really part of the Salish Sea? It really is. The Salish Sea is an estuary, and estuaries are defined by having fresh water that moves into salt water. And if we didn't have the trees and we didn't have the forests, then we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't be an estuary. And by their nature, estuaries are some of the most biologically productive areas on Earth, and the Salish Sea is one of the largest estuaries in the world. So that kind of puts us at the double top on the list there. I'm going to come back to Bellingham and talk at Mount Baker this fall about all of the cool creatures we have, so I won't get into that. But just remember that we have one of the most highly productive and amazing places on Earth. I also want to point out that this translates directly into economic benefits for all of us, because these natural resources and the system itself provide what we call natural capital. So remember that we have of the 37 mammals and the 172 birds and the 250 different fish species and the 3,000 invertebrates, this produces a foundation for what we call watchable wildlife. And these are people that are scuba divers, people that are whale watchers or bird watchers or kayakers or things like that. Watchable wildlife in Washington state alone, so this is just half of the ecosystem, is a $2 billion a year industry. And if you put all of the jobs together as one group, produces 21,000 jobs in Washington state. That's second only to Boeing for the #1 largest employer in Washington state. It's pretty impressive. On the consumptive front, our commercial fishing industry, which are things like salmon or Dungeness crab, is actually a $3.2 billion a year industry. And we're one of the nation's highest producers of cultured shellfish, or aquaculture for shellfish, and that's about a $97 million a year industry. A study came out in 2010 by Earth Economics, and it found that the natural capital produced by just the southern half of the Salish Sea, right, we only do things by one country or the other, found that the Washington side produces about $10 billion in revenue for the whole basin a year. And if they valued that and they said, if this were an economic asset that produced this much revenue, it would be valued, the goods and services and the benefit of that would be valued between $300 billion and $2.6 trillion a year. So that's pretty impressive. It's good news that we live in one of the greatest places on Earth. We have salmon, we have killer whales, but the reality is it's not all beautiful out there. And some people have kind of characterized it as a slow motion crisis. So if you look at the data of what happened over time, over the last 150 years, of all of those species I pointed out, 1/3 of the mammals and 1/3 of the birds are listed as threatened or endangered in Washington or British Columbia or are candidates for listing, and about 15% of the fish species are listed as threatened or endangered. That's pretty significant. We might have a $3.2 billion fishing industry, but we've lost about 95% of the salmon in the Pacific Northwest that used to return to those streams. Also, we no longer have robust fisheries like we used to have for Pacific cod, for rockfish, for herring. Many other fish that used to bring a lot of money in are not fished right now. They're commercially closed, and they're not bringing any money into the area. And frankly, we're fishing down the food chain. What ecologists say, out of that $3.2 billion, you would probably think salmon or halibut or something was at the top. What is the top are the invertebrates. We're working our way down phylogenetically. We're talking about Dungeness crab, we're talking about sea cucumbers, and we're talking about urchins. So the other thing, we have that $97 million a year shellfish aquaculture. At one point in our state, we can have 1/3 of those shellfish beds closed because of fecal coliform contamination. So if you do some back of the envelope calculations, that's about $33 million a year we're losing because we have poop in our water. It's kind of a sad state, really. And many people have heard that our southern resident killer whales and our transient killer whales are some of the most PCB contaminated mammals on Earth. And that maybe you don't care about that because you don't care about killer whales, but it's the same contaminants that have the Washington Department of Health have fish advisories. So there's a consumption advisory on Puget Sound Chinook. You shouldn't be eating it more than once a week. There's a consumption advisory on rockfish. You shouldn't be eating it more than once a week. And if you eat resident Chinook, you shouldn't be eating it more than twice a month. So we've really left a pollution legacy that needs a lot of cleaning up. And I'm not trying to scare you. I just want to give you the facts of why. Some people say, well, everything looks great out there. And it does look great out there. But there are major issues that we need to work on. The good thing is that in that Earth Economics report I talked about, they point out that as the ecological health of the Salish Sea improves or deteriorates, so too rises or falls the economic benefits. So if we can improve the ecological health, we improve the economic benefits of what we're getting. So let's get back to that concept of health for a minute. Being happy with the current state of the Salish Sea is kind of like Lance Armstrong being happy that he is healthy enough to ride his bike to work. Now, that's noble. I'm pretty happy that I'm healthy enough to ride my bike to work. And why it's good for many of us, why should we settle for mediocrity in the Salish Sea? Because it has been, and it can once again, be a 7-time winner of the Tour de France and Sports Illustrated Athlete of the Year. So can you imagine just the benefit of one thing, if we picked salmon? If we had 95% of that salmon, or 100% of that salmon back that we used to have, that it would dwarf that $3.2 billion a year fishing industry. And we wouldn't be talking about the health of Salish Sea. We'd be talking, how can we better allocate these billions and billions of dollars that come to us virtually for free every year with very little input on our part? It would totally be a game changer. And that's just one species involved. So one of the good things is that we know that ecological restoration is tied to economic recovery. The two of them go hand in hand. And I just want to give you one example that's an example out of our back door. So, okay, this is the last example, Bert. And the only example. The Sea Dock Society worked with the Northwest Straits Commission, which is a group based here in Bellingham, to look at the ecological impact of derelict fishing gear. So these are nets that fishermen lose, and they continue to fish underwater, and they catch salmon, they catch birds, marine mammals, invertebrates, and things like that. And so we did evaluation. What we showed was that while it costs $1,358 to remove a net, just in Dungeness crab alone, that first year, you're going to make back $1,966. So you're going to make back the money that you invested, and you're going to have a 50% return. And then for decades after that, you're going to have a 150% return on your investment. So the important thing that I want to get back to you is that the Salish Sea is important to all of us. It needs help, and that restoring it is a good economic investment for the entire region. And finally, let me remind you that while we have major efforts going, governmental efforts like the Puget Sound Partnership, we can't sit back and expect the government to do everything for us. It's going to take all of us on a personal level to change the decisions that we make, the way that we invest our money and the groups that we invest in, and to provide political support for decisions that need to be made. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. You know, the kind of management framework that Joe's been talking about is the one that has Department of Ecology, the EPA, and National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, a whole set of organizations and institutions that are charged with the protection of the Salish Sea. There is another voice, though, that I want us to hear about, and that's the voice that belongs to the tribes of the state of Washington, and in particular to our local tribe, the Lummi tribe. They have a different perspective on co-management, or on management. The kind of approach that is often given is that the agencies will take the tribes and have them consult with projects and decisions. The tribes themselves are used to co-management. By co-management, I mean each side has a vote that can veto the other side. That kind of perspective of co-management is infiltrating itself into our natural resource management issues. And Randy Kinley, who has been a longtime spokesman of the tribal perspective to fishing rights in particular, has agreed to come and talk with us today. The thing that I know about Randy that I like the most is that in all the years that he fished, he never once, or only once, got a license from the state because he acknowledged his tribal right to do it. He got a license once, and that was in the early 70s when we were having the gas embargoes, and that if you had a state fishing license, you got preference of gasoline.
I was temporarily one of our citizens.
Are you on? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
I want to thank Bert and Joe for putting this on and all of you being here today. And it's got to be in a context that, you know, the things that Joe talked about are the things that we as Indians have always known. And I appreciate the connectivity that he's laying out in his scientific, because before, and not to say that we're not all smart, but before the PhDs got here, the tribes always managed the resources. They knew everything was connected. And then the frustrating part from the tribes is that now that we're in recovery, the scientists are telling us to put the large woody debris back in the river, where 20 years ago it was that same scientists telling us to take it out of the river. And you know, so how do you do this stuff? And the tribes always manage the resource. Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little closer. That's it.
Okay. Let's backtrack. I'm going to let my good friend Troy Olson talk first so he can put it in the context of where we come from, because Troy lived and grew up on our reservation. He comes from generations from our village. I got involved in this politics stuff and this legal stuff back with my good friend Dan Rath sitting there, and I see a lot of people that I work with in this stuff. So, but I think it's important you hear from where we came from, especially if you haven't all been here for the last 60 years like we have. And then all of our stuff is taught to us orally. So I'll let my good friend Troy talk first.
Can you hear me? My name's Troy Olson. I'm an enrolled member of the Lumber. I served on the Natural Resource Commission. I was commissioner for the Gambling Commission for the Lummi Tribe. I'm currently a 50 for the Plumbers and Pipe. Oh, okay.
Or did it just go dead?
Hear me? Okay, sorry about that. I'll start over. I'm an enrolled member of the Lummi Nation. I served on the Natural Resource Commission in the past, and I also was on the Gambling Commission for the Lummi Nation for our casino. I'm a fifth-year plumber apprentice, and that's kind of what I chose to do when I'm not fishing for the tribe or my family. And I want to thank you guys for having me speak. This is unexpected. I have no really idea that I would be here today, but apparently for whatever reason I'm here and I'm able to speak. Anyway, the Salish Sea is a fascinating topic. From a tribal member's perspective, we as Coast Salish people, it entailed a lot of history when you talk about the Salish Sea and the people of the Salish Sea. We have family members on the Canadian side that are part of the Lummi people here, and part of the Lummi people here that are on the Canadian side. So we have a history of the Salish Sea from prior to treaty times, and we have, like any other tribe, we're 21st century Indians. We have cars, we have cell phones, blah, blah, blah. We have Facebook, and we're moving right along in technology. But I think the big thing is educating our children. They're our future, about where we're at now and where we're going. Because in the future, they will be the users. And we have to educate our children and their children of a healthy ecosystem. We have to preserve what we have. We all have to come to the same page. We all have to come to terms with where we're at with the Salish Sea, whether we be a tribe, whether we be a general population, or however you want to say, from the mountains or from the big cities. I know that there's a lot of work, good work being done, but it's going to take a lot more work, and hopefully we can all come to the same page for our future and our kids' future as far as users of the Salish Sea. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. The reason why I asked the question about how many's been here within the last 50 years, 60 years, both of us are direct descendants of the people that signed the original treaty of 1855 of Point Elliott. I'm, well, not just me, but Lamoth right down there, Harlan James, and Terry Hilaire, they're all descendants of the treaty too, and we all pack our traditional names. We're right to the, my family's right connected to South, the Duwamish chief that signed the treaties, and we have Chachusan and some of the other ones that signed the treaties. The thing that people have to understand, and which I hope that we can come to an understanding, is that science will only get us so far. Because of how far we came with the prosperity of the economics, it's going to be a hard salesmanship to reverse where we came from, because we're so used to the good times. And when I say the good times, the natural resources were expendable. And when I mean expendable, they were expendable in a way that people turned around and took the benefits that Joe was talking about and sacrificed what protects us. It's all connected. And when people don't understand, which I'm glad for all of our sakes that we have people like Joe that has them 2 PhDs, says yes. Us as Indian people are saying, yes, we have a champion that agrees with us. And so we can take that message out too and make sure that the younger generations understand, because like my partner said, it's their livelihood. It's their future. You know, we lived our good times, sorry to say. We're past that time now. We got to see what it was like. That's why I was always coming back to our philosophy is I can remember when. And I can remember when Bellingham in I-5 was right here. You know, and I'm only 61. I can remember how important, like he talked about the economics and the fishery, how Bellingham was so big. And that just changed in the last 30 years. Look at all the stuff that Joe was talking about. That didn't happen 50 years ago, people. That happened within the last 50 years. And if we don't realize it, not at pointing at fingers or saying it's your fault, and take responsibilities, we're never going to recover it, sorry to say. Because all we're going to do is keep on going. And at the expense of the environment, which we think is that pristine glow out there when the water is glassy and the sun is set and you see a kayaker going across Chuckanut Bay, it's going to be there. But when you get down below it, watch out, because we know what's there. And it's not about pointing fingers, it's just that the people that benefited at the time aren't here now. But yet all of us have to fix it. And if we can't turn around and, like my friend said, sit down and figure out where we want Bellingham to be, Whatcom County to be, we're going to be in a terrible situation in the future. Because our kids aren't going to be able to benefit what we got to live through. And that includes my good friend Henry Bierlich over there, the agriculture people. Because other things are going to come in and take place economically. We got 2.5 million people coming into the state of Washington within the next, I don't know how many years. Reason why I know all this stuff is that I work with that process that Joe thinks, and no disrespect to Joe, is the Puget Sound Partnership. I have a real hard time with that because they process us to death. You know, and I just look at, I says, Jesus Christ, people, we got enough science. We got smart people. Let's start implementing. But people are so scared how it's going to affect me. And instead of how we're taught, how are we going to do it? And that's where well, I'm glad that Bert asked us to come here, is that we get to understand where we're coming from. We want to be healthy, prosperous, and do the things that we've done in our lifetime. When we say, which now the outside are grabbing our sound bites, when the tide's out, the table's set. That's what the state's using now as a measuring stick. You know, and when we want to go out and be able to set a net to catch a fish, without catching fish that isn't contaminated, or when the shellfish, because of pollution. And then we get so much resistance because it affects my bottom line. The tribes, all they're asking, and what's going to happen if we don't get in the process is we're going to be forced to go to court. And we don't want to be there, like my friend said. But if we don't get action, because I don't think in our lifetime we have the ability to change the tide here. Because the people are set in their mind, and then we're going to have to go get the big bad bully to come here who we signed our treaties with. That's the federal government. And we don't want to do that, but where else can we go? You know, we don't have the luxury to go to the county council. We don't have the luxury to go to the state down there and voice our concerns with the legislators that don't give a rat's. You know, people don't understand why we were put on our reservations. We didn't have that choice. I was hoping my friend mentioned that back in the 70s, early 70s, if you're not familiar, both sides of the Nooksack River, just below the bridge, was where our village was. The feds came in and told our people without hesitate, says, you're going to move because you live in a floodplain. No consideration, no nothing. They just made our families move. But nowadays, you go up into the South Fork or any place that floods, no, you can't do that. That's my private property. And all we're looking at is equality here. Why don't we get to play at the same level as everybody else is being held to? Because the law is supposed to be set for everybody, not just to enforce and implement on us. It's the same way what Joe was talking about. All these species that are going to hell in a handbasket, they come up with solutions because they're scared to do the right thing. Step up to the plate and say, this is bad management. Instead of doing that, they'll go over here and create an MPA. Think they're going to recover the 100-year-old rockfish or do that. But because of the way the system's set up, the politics and the voting, you know, the resources are going to be sacrificed, sorry to say. And it gets back to how do we want Whatcom County, how do we want our kids to live in Whatcom County? How do we want this thing to grow? We were sitting at home this morning talking about how Roeder came to our people and asked, can we use your water on Whatcom Creek? And if we were thinking the way we are now, we would have said, hell no. You know, because that's what it got us. You know, people don't take this stuff into consideration. You know, when they came and asked us to sign the treaty, we didn't go ask them. And so we preserved our rights. But then when we try to use our rights, people are saying, oh, Jesus Christ, them damn Indians down there killing all the fish. But people don't understand that when they put us on the reservations where we're at, all these fish that Bert was talking about in the management has been allocated based upon 50-50. And what they call is the North Falcon process that was established by Wilkerson, ain't it, Dan? Who was the director of history back in the 80s. He kicked out all the biologists, and he sat down at the table with us guys as Indians and says, how are we going to do this? And so he says, well, you do this with your share, and this is how we're going to do this with our share. But you got to make sure that your share doesn't impact the terminal areas. Because all of us, 26? No, 23. Boat tribes, whatever that number is in Puget Sound, that fishes in terminal areas. When I say terminal areas, can't move out, like the Squaxin and the Squallies can't come up here and fish up in the northern Salish Sea. So we got to make sure that that fish that comes in the straits that's picked off by macaw, the sports guys, everybody else, doesn't affect their ability to harvest their fish at home. So when you see us fishing in the terminal area, down there below Stevie's Point and in the bridge, please take into consideration that one is that we're not killing every last damn fish. And don't take this out of context, because the tribes are the only real managers. They're the only ones that, and I'm not bragging because I'm a tribal member. Or yes, I will brag. But anyhow, you see all this stuff, but it doesn't get out to the public. You know, and we're fighting over the last fish and stepping on this last egg. I mean, based upon court cases, the tribe, you line up all the winning side, all the losing side. It's like this for the tribe. The tribe has won so much. And that's why I'm saying we don't want to be like that, because the only ones that prevail on that, and it drives more animosity amongst us. But the tribes don't have the right to deal with habitat, and that's the biggest problem. But we have people like Joe that believes the same stuff that our people tell us, but then all of a sudden, oh geez, there's my private property right. But yet they don't realize that there's a common law that I should not, at least how we were taught, I should not be able to do something on my property that affects somebody else downhill. And at least from our perspective, since we're the lowest part of the hill, and shit runs down the hill, we get it. Excuse my French. And, you know, these initiatives, Puget Sound Partnership, we're working on this shellfish initiative right now with the county. The county's having a tough time, but it gets back to leadership. And it's you people that vote that leadership in. Because we got the smart people, and we got the science. And it's about time that we implement the science and do the job, and we're really serious about this. And then the other thing is, from my perspective, and this is all this ain't Lummy's perspective, this is my perspective, so please don't say this is Lummy. Because if we're serious about solving the problem, we can't rely on the federal money. And that's, you know, when we got involved with this with Norm Dix 5-6 years ago, when he came to this and sold it to us, you know, and the tribes bought into it, this Puget Sound Partnership, we says, on the condition business isn't as usual. And our concern was that the partnership is a state agency. This partnership is no different than the state agencies that had control of the conditions that we're in right now. That's what scared us, our tribes. And now reality is really setting in, because the partnership ain't doing nothing. I know, sorry.
Oh, no, Randy, that was perfect. Well, I could listen all afternoon, and that would be the Indian way, but I know in 20 minutes all of you need to be going out the door and off to whatever it is else you're doing this afternoon. But, Don, do I turn this over to you now? Yeah. You're in charge?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that obviously this is an issue that is a big issue. It brought you here. It's something that profoundly affects us all and will affect children, grandchildren, and anybody who continues to live here. And so that's why when we looked at this topic, we thought it was one of the ways to open up maybe a dialogue and get word out to the community as to what the real issues are, and perhaps we can continue this. Obviously, we only have a short time now. We can do another program down the line. But now it's a time for questions, and we have two people. Skip is back here with a microphone, and Chuck over here, and they'll be wandering around the room. As you know, we do questions, not speeches, and members with badges get first shot at it. So thank you. Let's go.
Can you hear me? My name is Christopher Granis, and my question is, what's a greater threat to the Salish Sea, ocean acidification due to increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or the exporting coal from Cherry Point?
Oh. Ocean acidification.
Is that your vote? I don't know. The chemistry of the Salish Sea is complicated because of the mixture of fresh water and salt, and pHs vary more than they do in the open ocean. If we do get any clue that something's happening with acidification, it will come from the ocean first, and I think it will be hard to detect some measure of a signal in the Salish Sea. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
So I think that's kind of like going to your doctor and saying, hey, I'm kind of worried about the heart attack. So should I quit smoking, start exercising, or start eating right?
In your 70s.
Exactly.
Good answer. Did we do it?
Okay.
We are going to try and alternate from side to side, but if no one's on that side...
Can I answer his question, though? Because there's information that talks about the ocean acidification that says that it's not as bad as its people claimed it to be. And I'm not a scientist, but there's information out there based upon talking to our smart people.
Yeah. Unless the questions are directed to a certain panel member, you all get a shot at it. So.
Hi, I'm Dave Bergman, and I'm just wondering what, if anything, people are doing to anticipate what to do about the influence from all of this garbage coming from Japan and how it's going to impact the Salish Sea. Is it going to come in? Are people looking at that and trying to anticipate what nasty stuff is going to come in and affect it?
I'll take a chance. We have one of the world's experts on floating ocean junk, Curtis Ebensmeyer, who has a newsletter that's primed and ready to follow it, and that's where you should go for more information. The surface current in the Salish Sea is almost always out towards the ocean, and so there will be a kind of natural barrier to prevent stuff floating into the sea. So I suspect it will not be a major problem.
Cool. You're being asked about what happened to the boat. I'll direct it to all of you. In 3 or 4 words or less, what's the single most efficient, quickly done thing that we can do to preserve or regenerate the Salish Sea?
Raise taxes.
You guys want to comment? Go ahead. I'll wait for you. I don't know if I can do this in 3 or 4 words, but give me 3 or 4 minutes. But basically what the scientists try and do is we try and say, what are the things that we can do that have the broadest spatial benefit? What are the things that have the highest risk for irreversibility? So if we don't do something now, it's going to be harder or more expensive to do it later. So we can put together algorithms on things like that, and then we can come up with the list. And we're actually in the process of trying to do that right now for action items that are coming out of the partnership's action agenda to try and say, look, how do we prioritize these based on the things that we know scientifically are important? So that's underway.
From a tribal perspective, I think the most important thing is that because people don't understand that we only have so much commodity in the freshwater system that we have to, this is for human health in the community, is resolve the water issues between us. Because if we don't resolve and determine what is what, you know, that people don't understand that we're living on borrowed time. That's my personal view, not Lummy's view.
Over there.
I'd like to thank our friends from the Lummi Nation for coming and visiting. We've had them visit with the City Club many times, and I always see there's a great affinity for a lot in the community here in the interests of the nation. And I'm just interested in what you think can be done to help build that bond over time.
There's a variety of things that invite us more on a social, because I work for the tribe on many venues, and we were trying to deal with the upper Nooksack watershed on the South Fork. You know, we went right into the communities and had functions like this. You know, we went up and cooked barbecued fish for the farmers with Henry. Come out and see how we live, and so that you really connect how important that when we say the tide's out, the table's set, or how important fish is to us and our people, because fish to us is just like any year prize, your most important prize, how you want to do, or you know, that's what it's all about. It's the human connection, because we have too much of this political interference between us and the assumptions. Just like I talked about, people assume that we don't regulate fisheries. We do. Before Bolt even came in, our grandparents, his grandpa was a fish cop. our fishing season started from 4 o'clock Sunday to 5 o'clock Friday. I showed Bert some documents that my grandparents had back in '61. So we've always been stewards of the land, but we never been able to get to the upper end where the problems are created. But know who we're coming, where we're coming from, and what our practices and what we call our shellangin, our way of life, so you can understand and as much as possible.
Question here?
Thank you. Welcome. Anybody can answer, but I just want to say to Randy, I agree with so much of you said, and I think you commented about the Puget Sound Partnership, and frankly, I had questions at the beginning because it did take over other agencies. But I think the other issue you brought up was on the property rights, and where mine end where yours begin, and where that line is not always definable. But I think the two are related very much. And so do you have any comments, or anybody else, how we ever get over this hurdle of exactly where is that line? Because the water and the air are shared by all of us. And in order to live, we need both of those in good shape. So how do we get over the hurdle and really get something done that people understand how serious it is?
Well, my first thought, Harriet, is for everybody to understand what the consequences of adjudication very well might be. And if we understand the consequences of adjudication, I think it might scare enough people to overcome the barriers to getting things done.
What would those consequences be?
Could be half the farmers of the county don't have any water anymore. All the little farmers don't have any water. Maybe the city doesn't have enough water. And the courts will decide who gets the water, and that's it. And yeah, and it might be a burden on our grandchildren rather than us.
Here.
I'm wondering how the designation of the Salish Sea has affected the international management of the resource.
Yeah. Based upon what we see is that it's getting more notoriety. British Columbia has started to focus on some of the problems, but they're so lax on environmental law compared to what we have. And so the whole idea is trying to get the First Nations, because they're in the treaty negotiation process, to step up to plate, because that's a inherent right, just like ours is. So they try to force the people to do the right thing. And that's the federal government to step up and implement some of them things. Because a lot of things don't go through a public process, and the environment's not even taken into consideration in some of the bigger economic machines.
I'd like to just quickly identify the organization that Randy belongs to. It's called the Coast Salish Gathering. It's an organization of 77 tribes and First Nations from BC and Washington that have all come together with the explicit purpose of protecting the resources of the Salish Sea. It's a strong and vibrant organization, and if you're interested in how this transboundary stuff works within Indian country, you can just go and Google Coast Salish Gathering, all one word.
And I want to point out that the Coast Salish are doing a fantastic job of transboundary working on Salish Sea issues, and the federal government and the state government are doing a lousy job of that. And there's infinite amount of room for improvement on everything from water quality, air quality, species recovery, and all of these different things that still need to happen.
Hi, thank you all for being here. It's been very interesting. One thing I'd sure like the people including in the conversation is the elephant in the room, which I think is the increase in population. More population, more impacts on the environment. Could you all make some comments on that? I think we can't let that just be the elephant in the room that we don't talk about.
Based upon my experience is something as a model that did a real good job, and it burnt some political chips, was what Ron Sims did down in King County. He went out and changed the CAO, and it talks about how you build and stuff like that. So you're not building so much sprawl and stuff like that. You identify what is buildable, where you want it to build, that's going to have the least amount of footprint. But that gets back to the willing to step up and stand beside your county council people and identifying them areas.
So I think of Whatcom County without exempt wells. That's where I'd start.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you very much. My question is really a follow-on on hers. What is the cause of the pollution and the problem that's happening? I see great parallels in the descriptions of the problems in the Sound with those that I know about our Lake Whatcom drinking water resource that I've been working at for years. So is it the upland pollution that's running off into the water that is an essential physical source of the problems?
I would say that, so there's definitely the pollution is coming from land, even with, if you consider legacy dumping. So it depends on the chemicals, but we've changed the way that water travels from land into the ocean. And that's shoreline buffers, culverts, and things like that. And that has sped up the process. We've lost filtration and mannerisms for that stuff to be detoxified before it gets into the ocean. So it's the way that we've treated the upland watershed and the way that we change the water that's coming down into that.
It's kind of like where you want to put all your apples in what basket, you know. To solve the pollutant problems is part of a problem that the tribes are willing to support, but we're looking at other things that want to get back to the salmon recovery, which takes, you know, cold, clean water. Because of what you're asking, based upon what we see, is your retrofit is your biggest problem in the big urban cities. Because whatever date it is, they don't comply to modern standards now, from what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, here's a question. At the last City Club meeting, there was a little thing handed out that gave some reading that was available for people on a website. And I'm curious to see if people who went to the website would be willing to put up their hands. How many people checked out the website first? More than that. Yeah, I don't know. My Google counter said that there was 50 people during that time period. So anyway, I just want to remind you, if you are curious about some of these issues, there is some reading to satisfy your curiosity and get you started on the issues that we've been talking about today. At the bottom of Holly's words on the Salish Sea, there's a mistake. There's a website address, but it's wrong. Yeah. Just if you go to www.edu/SalishSea and stop there, scratch out the rest of it that has to do with City Club. I don't know how I put that in there. That will take you right to the website, and there's a page there for reading about the material of this presentation. And Joe wanted to have one final word.
Yeah, put some postcards and stickers in the back. Those are free. Take them with you. If you want to get them for free, you can sign up. You can get them electronically. Just a source. Science is really of no value if you don't get it out to the general public. Thanks.
And Randy wants a last word.
Yeah.
Please don't take the message that we want to put anybody out of business to get to where we want to be. Because all the tribes are asking for is considerations to support how we want to carry on our way of life. And that gets back to the 60 years, because prior to Bolt, we used to have pea slime, we had carrots, we had corn, we had everything coming down the river. And I just want to make sure that when the tribe keeps proceeding down its path to get to where we want to be, if people go out of business, it's not because of us. And we're not here to put anybody out of business, because you're not going no place, and we sure as hell ain't going no place. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much for the panel members. You know, just as a personal observation, a lot of times we're at City Club programs and people are paying attention, they're really in there, and once in a while somebody fidgets. When you're in the presence of a program like this, nobody moves, nobody makes a sound, and there's just this intense, profound silence. And I would like to thank folks again for so much of their experience bringing to us, our alumni friends. We have something for you. We're going to give you each a copy of Whatcom Places, which shows pictures of so many of the places we all treasure. And obviously, we talked about the water today, but the land is connected to the water. It's all of one. So may this be the beginning of a process where we all begin to think more about it and talk to other people. That's what City Club is about. So thanks again for coming. You're the ones who make it possible. See you next month.